wasn't really that much going on the internet besides file sharing that would require a broadband connection. Another thing I can tell you is that was actually quite lucrative. We gave away Kazaa as free software, but we showed some ads at the bottom. And my mom always asked me, she couldn't understand how we could make money when we gave away a free software. And she always asked me, how do you make money with Kazaa? And I told her that at our peak, we had about 100 million users of Kazaa. And the average user would spend about an hour and a half actually looking at this window where we could show our ads. And to put 100 million users in perspective, the World Cup final in Sweden attracted 2 million viewers. And the World Cup, is about an hour and a half, and it's only once every 4 years, whereas Kazaa was happening every single day. So it didn't take long for the recording industry of America to decide that we were enemy number one. And in addition to distributing music on Kazaa, people were also distributing movies and TV shows. So the entire motion picture industry of America joined the fight against Kazaa. And we were sued at that time for $300 billion, which was the GDP of Sweden, approximately, at the time. So we were 3 business guys and 4 programmers in Estonia that all of a sudden had to deal we went from managing a software company and creating what we thought was great software into a company that basically managed lawyers. Teams and teams and teams of lawyers. I was once on a conference call with 40 lawyers in one call. And I can tell you that if you're ever in a conference call with 40 lawyers in one call, you're going to want to block out a lot of time. Because everyone wants to say something. There's no such thing as a lawyer on a conference call that doesn't want to say anything. That was a very long call that I think took part over a period of several days, actually. There was a little bit of paranoia that ensued in the company at that time. We didn't know what was going to happen. Nicholas was sued himself personally and was restricted from traveling to the US for fear of what might happen. I was kind of Nicholas's right-hand man and the designer of the Kazaa software at that time. And a lot of the documents that I'd authored were eventually being read in the US Supreme Court. So I didn't know the ramifications either if I went back to the States. And remember, our expertise was not in managing lawsuits, it was in creating software. The other aspect of this paranoia is that I wasn't allowed to use the software that I was designing for fear that maybe my internet connection was being monitored, or perhaps my computer would be requisitioned and could be searched. And so I had to rely on other people to tell me about their experiences with Kazaa in order for me to design the software that I could never myself use, which is kind of like designing a car without ever being allowed to test drive it. But it was actually a great learning experience to learn about getting feedback from users and understanding what's important to them and being able to put that in a product and kind of ignoring my own biases about what should be there. We made a wise decision at that point. We sold Kazaa to a group of investors in Australia. And the smart thing about it was that we kept the rights to the main peer-to-peer technology that created the network. So the Australians, they got the user base, 100 million users. They got this Kazaa program, which was kind of the front end, the outer face of the software. And they got all the trouble with the lawsuits, which they have to take care of. And we got a little bit of money, but most importantly, we kept this peer-to-peer networking technology, which we subsequently used to start a number of different companies. And I'm not going to go into detail about all of them. I'm going to jump right to one that was initially called Skyper. And the idea for Skyper derived from the term sky and peer-to-peer. And it involved sharing your internet connection wirelessly to other people that wanted to have an internet connection. And in those days, Wi-Fi was really new. We all have Wi-Fi now in our phones and in our laptops built in. But we nonetheless saw an opportunity for Wi-Fi in the future. And we thought that if you could install a software that would allow people to connect wirelessly no matter where they were without having to have their own home network, then you could actually do a lot of interesting things. And we took this idea to a lot of VCs. Every VC in Stockholm, every VC in Scandinavia practically, in Europe. And we pitched this idea of Sky peer-to-peer. And it was rejected by everybody. Nobody liked this idea of Skyper. But there was one bullet point on the presentation that garnered a lot of interest. And what we said was that if we're successful in making a program that's so ubiquitous, so widespread, that you can carry around an internet connection with you always, then we could actually compete with the cell phone companies. You wouldn't have to have a Telia contract. You could have a piece of free software on your phone, at least in the big cities. And this idea, the VCs thought was pretty exciting. They just thought that we couldn't pull off making the network so widespread. So we made that bullet point a little bit bigger. We made it a little bit bolder. And then finally, it was like the full page of our presentation. And then we realized that Janis, who was another partner involved in the company, he was a very fearless person. And he said, let's just make our own voice over IP program. So we looked at the competition, and there were a lot of competitors out there for voice over IP. But there were problems with all of them. And I don't know if anyone here has any experience with programs like Phone Free or Net Meeting. But the main problem was you had to know the IP address of the person you were calling, which I now see a lot of confused faces in the room. And I think that's exactly the reason they failed. Not only did you have to know your own IP address, but the person you were calling. And to make matters worse, if you were sharing an internet connection between a couple of different computers, which is often the case in an office or in a home, we have 3 or 4 laptops at home, but I'm a huge geek, it wouldn't work at all. So it ended up being a very frustrating experience using voice over IP, and we thought that we could solve some of these issues using our peer-to-peer technology that we kept from Kazaa when we sold it. So we dropped the R because Skyper was a trademark owned by a German company, and we became Skype. And I was the first product manager of Skype, which means I was responsible, together with an extremely talented team, of designing the Skype software and releasing it to the world. So we started in isolation. There was only one investor that came along board, now a very happy investor that came along on board, and a couple of seed investors. And we started designing the Skype program. And we wanted to make something, like I said, that eliminated the problems of this old voice over IP software. But we also wanted to make something that was so simple that my mother could use it. Which is if some of you know my mother in here, that's a huge challenge. If you've So, as we iterated, it took us about half a year from start to finish to make the first working versions of Skype. And during that time, we made drastic improvements every day. So it was a lot of fun working with this team of programmers in Estonia, because on Thursday we had a program that barely worked, and then on Friday it would work 90% of the time. The following Monday it worked 95% of the time. And I'll never forget, once I was in my apartment in Vasastan, and it was late at night, and we had just made a huge, drastic improvement to our voice engine. And I made a phone call. It was late at night, I was already in bed, I was just in my underwear. And I called one of our programmers in Estonia. And they're an hour and ahead, but those